Hello and welcome to OPA GC Sociology. Today we're going to look at what is the conflict perspective of the function of the family. So when we mean the conflict perspective, remember last lesson, it's those theories that think those structures, in this case the family, are negative things for society, and we're going to be looking at Marxism and feminist theory. Okay, for the do now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read through those 12 statements and say which ones are true and which ones are false. We're then going to go through those and just note down which ones are true, which ones are false. This is based on everything we've done so far in terms of looking at the family unit. Okay, so just pause the video for a few minutes and then see which ones are which. Right, so going through it, Murdoch was an anthropologist who studied over 250 different societies. Well, that's true. Number two, Murdoch was a functionalist who claimed the nuclear family was the least dominant family type within most societies. That's false. He actually said it was the most dominant. Number three, Murdoch distinguished 5 functions of the family: education, reproductive, emotional, economic, and sexual. That's false. That's one too many. So you're taking off the emotional one there. Number 4, Parsons identified 2 main functions of the family: primary socialization and the stabilization of adult personalities. Well, that's true. Number 5, Parsons' sex role theory suggested men are biologically suited for the expressive role and women for the instrumental. That's false. It's the other way around. So he does say about biologically being suited, but it's the men who were instrumental and the women expressive. Number 6, Parsons' idea of the warm bath theory argued that the family absorbs the pressures of modern society. So that's true. Number 7, the functionalist theories of the family roles are largely supported by New Right. That's true as well. Number 8, Murdoch and Parsons' ideas can be critiqued for failing to consider dysfunction within the nuclear family. Another true. Parsons can be critiqued for his dated views on gender roles, assuming biological suitability. Again, another true. Parsons can be praised for considering the success of diverse family types in the 2 functions of the family. That's false. He only talks about nuclear family. Number 11, the family can be considered as a connection based on blood ties, law, or bond. Okay, that's true, the broad perspective, that is. And then finally, number 12, Marxist feminist theories both believe the function of the family is to reinforce inequalities, gender and class. That is true as well. Okay, so just see what you got from there. You might need to go back and revisit some bits if you miss some of those out. So we're going to start with the Marxist theory, and simply all you need to do is just summarize what the functions are as we go along, similar to what we've done with Murdoch and Parsons in the last lesson. So Zaretsky, like I said, Marxist perspective, it critiques the functionalist view of the nuclear family's function in society. It argues that the role of family is not to stabilize society, but instead to support capitalist systems and to reinforce class inequality. The family is therefore an example of a capitalist superstructure. So just like the education system reinforces class divides, so too does the family. Zaretsky identifies 4 different functions. Now, these are not formal, but I've sort of broken them down into these. The last one, the unit of consumption, being the most important, the one he talks about the most. It's worth noting them all down there. Okay, so the first one's the economic functions. It's just this idea that under capitalism, women as housewives and mothers carry out unpaid labor through domestic chores. So that's things like cleaning, childcare. However, it's devalued as it's seen as being private and not in the public sphere. But because it's behind closed doors, people don't legitimize it as a job. And there's a reproductive one. So the family reinforces your social class. So things like inheritance, passing down the wealth. Ideological function. So each class reinforces the ideology of capitalism, but it also reinforces people's class position. So it's almost that ruling class ideology. It's this idea that if you're working class, your working class family might tell you, if you have aspirations to better yourself, they might say, "Oh, that's not going to happen." Or there might be a sense of entitlement that's passed on through families who are upper class. And then, like I said, this is the most important one. So at the bare minimum, you need to be writing this one down. It's a unit of consumption. It's just this idea that the family as a structure helps to consume within capitalist systems. So whether that's ideas or physical items. So it might be, think of it this way, a family television, a family shop, a family holiday, things like that. So that's the Marxist theory. So the critique of the Marxist theory, like I said before, maybe just have 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses. You generally won't refer to them, but it's good just to have in your pocket there. So the strengths, it highlights class inequality within the family. It acknowledges how inheritance can reinforce class inequality. But it does have some weaknesses. It fails to consider diverse family types because it is concentrating on critiquing the functionalist theory. It also ignores gender inequality. So that idea of women's labour as housewives being manipulated, it's in terms of capitalism, not in terms of gender and patriarchy in the eyes of Marxist theory. Also, it ignores other explanations for inheritance, not based on class, but maybe based on religion or culture. Fails to consider social mobility, so people can better themselves or perhaps drop down. And it ignores other reasons why people get married. So people don't get married to support capitalism, they get married, you'd hope, because they want to be together and whatnot. So just note down, like I said, for task 3, just 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses. Right, so in terms of GCSE, the distinction of different types of feminism, it's not something that necessarily comes up. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen. It's worth just noting, liberal feminism is generally this idea that concentrates on gender equality through roles and representation. Marxist feminism looks at gender inequality alongside capitalist inequality, or class inequality rather. And then radical feminism sort of looks at extreme cases of patriarchy. But we don't really need to know too much about that. We're really just going to concentrate on what we need to for the GCSE. So the feminist perspective. So feminists see gender as a construct. So it's something that's shaped by society. And that society happens to be patriarchal. So these constructs are sexist in nature. And we can see that through primary socialization, where the family reinforces patriarchal ideas and reinforces gender inequality. So that's something that Anne Oakley talks about through the idea of canalization. We've talked about this before, in fact. There's this idea that things like toys will reinforce the instrumental and expressive role. So a girl might receive something along the lines of toys that are relating to beauty and or maybe domestic chores or looking after children. So it might be you had a baby doll as a child if you're a girl, and that's encouraging you to be a housewife later on, to look after the childcare, things like that. It's very subtle. And the theorists we're going to concentrate on here are Delphy and Leonard, who talk about this exploitation through family and through marriage. So it's worth noting down the key elements of Delphy and Leonard's ideas. So very similar to the Marxist perspective. They talk about private labour. So Delphy and Leonard acknowledge that this domestic work is free labour. But their emphasis isn't on exploitation of capitalism, but exploitation of a wife by a husband. And they highlight this exploitation can reinforce patriarchy in several ways. So firstly, the fact that the domestic labour is used by the husband, so the fact that because you are, as maybe a housewife, cleaning the house, cooking the dinner, looking after the kids, that's allowing the husband to recharge their batteries, ready for work the next day, to be on their best form. So it's a sacrifice, isn't it? But it's also work that's not being valued because it's behind closed doors. So it's really sort of decreasing women's value there. Because women are not being paid for this as well, they're financially dependent on men. And finally, it frames this idea that men are more important and that women are their subordinates. This idea that women must sort of tiptoe around and change their days and shape their days around their husband's work. So we've got the Marxist theory of Zaretsky's talking about the function of the family to reinforce class inequality. And here with Delphi and Leonard, its family its function is to reinforce patriarchy and gender inequality. Okay, same again. So just note down 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses. So it does highlight gender inequality within the family, the fact that gender can be a construct. There are lots of studies as well that do support this idea that women contribute more to domestic chores. Some of the weaknesses, it has considered class inequality. So maybe that free labour is to do with capitalism more. Functionalists argue, well, it's not intentionally unequal, it's more that it's functional. Again, although feminists do celebrate diverse family types, Delphi and Leonard themselves are not considering diverse family types. So not feminism as a whole, but Delphi and Leonard in this case. And then Wilmot and Young, the March of Progress, so that's actually a study we're going to look at later on. It's just this, it's actually a study that gets found out to be, has lots of faults with it, but they're arguing essentially that men have contributed more, there is progress being made. Okay, don't worry about the final task, because that's something that we were going to do as a class. But it might be something to have in mind. Look at one of those theories, functionalism, Marxism, feminism, and just think how you would maybe just write a speech to, you don't have to, but just a speech that would support that theory, and what would be those points to counter any critiques.